Okay, so this week, big week for Nintendo. Metroid Prime 4 has been released, and we're going to be talking about it. We're going to be talking about the review reaction, difference of opinion there. But crucially, we didn't actually have access to the Switch 1 version of the game until launch, oddly enough. And so I thought I'd take a look at it. And well, let's just get straight into it, shall we? I mean, we have seen a trailer before, which was purportedly running on Switch One, which we're going to have to revisit in a bit. Let's talk about the final version here, though, and I'd say that ultimately, what Metro Studios has done here is actually a really, really good version of the game. It's a very accomplished counterpart to the Switch 2 version, bearing in mind the yawning technical chasm between the two chipsets we've got there. Let's just take a look at some comparison footage here. You'll notice immediately that the biggest difference, and pretty much I'd say the only difference in terms of gameplay as such, is the fact that the resolution is cut back significantly. The docked mode, first of all, it looks like native 720p there with a 900p visor. Now, that one's going to be interesting because when we saw the initial Metroid Prime 4 trailer, which seemed to be running on Switch 1, that was actually operating at 900p at the time. So we'll talk about that at the moment. But otherwise, the main difference, I think, beyond the resolution is just basically the precision of everything and the fact that you're getting much better quality textures on the Switch 2. John, it's a game transformed, isn't it, really, when you're playing it on Switch 2? I mean, obviously, we kind of did it in reverse this time, in that we played it on Switch 2 first and then went back to Switch 1. But man, I mean, it's still a good-looking Switch 1 game, but it's worlds apart from Switch 2.
Weirdly enough, the feeling I get from going back to this reminds me of when you would go from like a really top tier Xbox Series X game, and then you'd look at a low quality Series S version where perhaps they didn't quite get the execution down. They sacrificed some things, the resolution's cut way back, and everything just looks kind of messier. And that's basically what we have here. But this is definitely a case, though, when you take it on its own terms and you consider the Switch 1 hardware isn't all that much capable than Xbox 360. Let's remember that. This is not a very powerful machine. I think this game looks phenomenal when you consider what the hardware is. Like, it's a gorgeous game that runs at a locked 60 frames per second on the Switch 1, with the only real sacrifice being texture quality, which of course makes sense, and resolution, which you're going to have to sacrifice that to get 60 FPS. And my guess is that perhaps they did drop the resolution during development. I mean, that stuff's not really fixed, right, in place. So maybe to get that last bit of performance out, they had to drop a little bit further. But either way, that is the big differentiator. But obviously, being that this was a Switch 1 game, I think they made really smart choices in bringing it to Switch 2. It doesn't drastically alter the assets or anything, but you basically get a much sharper, more precise presentation. The extra textures, resolution, everything makes a big difference. And it's also worth noting that when you play in the 120 hertz mode, you're still getting a gigantic leap in image quality. Even though, because you're dropping to 1080p to get the 120 mode, but like the image treatment, textures, everything is much, much better than Switch 1, which is at 60. Yeah. So it's nice.
What do you think about anti-aliasing? Because I'm not seeing much evidence of it on Switch 1, and whereas on Switch 2, they actually did a pretty good job, bearing in mind it's almost certainly a post-processing in nature.
Well, based on the intellectual property notices, it is SMAA. And it's consistent with the results of SMAA, and the resolution of SMAA combined with that, it's definitely a lot better. I think in the comparison shot where you're walking into Volt Forge for the first time, you look at the area above the door on Switch 1, it's just a mess of shimmering pixels, which makes me wonder if they're just foregoing any sort of anti-aliasing, because the image is so much noisier there, and you really feel that. In addition, of course, because not only are the textures less sharp normally, but because of the lower resolution, it also has an impact on texture filtering, as we know, since that scales with resolution. So like when you're looking across a flat surface, oblique angles especially, like the textures just turn into mush on Switch 1. Plus, beyond all the image quality stuff, Switch 2 also gains access to HDR, which,
Right, of course.
as I said in my review, it is honestly one of the best HDR implementations I've seen in a long time. Like the range between dark and light and the brightness of the highlights, it's enough to make Oliver sweat. Like, that's how bright we're talking here. It's very well done, and I'm a big fan of it. But conversely, so this is the other interesting thing. I picked up my Switch OLED yesterday for the first time in a while, and yeah, I did feel like I was surprised at how good it still feels in my hand. I think a lot of people still prefer the Switch 2, and they're both good. They're nice feeling machines, but the screen, man. I mean, we know the OLED screen is superior to what's in the Switch 2. That it was always clear that that's the case. But in this case, more so than usual, because there's so much camera rotation, the response time of the Switch 2 screen stands out a lot more. Plus, the Switch 2 screen has a single LED backlight, which means it glows in dark areas, of which this game has plenty. And just on the strength of that, like I feel like the Switch OLED in portable mode ends up looking better in many ways. It's definitely not as sharp. Image quality is definitely worse, but like it even almost looks more like HDR on the OLED screen, despite being SDR, because the Switch 2 screen just can't actually produce HDR, and they're of similar peak brightness, but you don't have that contrast range on the Switch 2. So
yeah, if you were telling me yesterday that the 120 hertz mode in handheld on Switch 2 just doesn't work for you because of the screen.
Yeah, the screen doesn't. I mean, it's been measured now. We have numbers on this. The screen is not technically capable of fully representing what 120 frames per second can show. Right, the temporal resolution isn't there, and sure enough, it just smears the image. And so as a result, you kind of lose the key benefit of 120 hertz is that, I mean, it does look smoother, yes, but you also improve motion persistence, clarity, and it, you don't get that benefit on the Switch 2 screen. So
that's quite an interesting comment for you to say there about playing it mobile on Switch OLED, because we've got pixel counts here from Oliver of portable mode at 504p for the scene, 576p for the visor. So and it is a bit chunky.
Yeah, and that's definitely a case where the screen size helps, right? But even at that screen size, you'll definitely notice additional pixelation. And because of the lack of motion resolution on the Switch 2, I actually think the 4K, well, sorry, not 4K, the 1080p 60 mode and portable mode on Switch 2 is the way to go. And it is appreciably more detailed. It's very, very sharp, no doubt. It's just the motion stuff and the lack of the poor black levels that stand out.
Mm-hmm. Oliver, what's your take on all of this?
Well, I'm just really impressed by the way this game looks. I've had the opportunity to play maybe an hour or two over the past day, just a little sampling, but I'm super impressed by the way that it looks. It has phenomenal baked lighting, great materials. It just looks beautiful. The size of the environments outside of that central hub area, they're pretty small on the smaller side, but I think that really gives them the opportunity to really dial up the baked lighting quality and make everything just look pristine and really put that artist time into making sure that everything looks fantastic. I'm a little bit surprised in terms of the resolution counts that they're cut down from Prime Remastered so much, but after playing it, I think it makes more sense just based on the visual fidelity that they're targeting with this game. Prime Remastered was 900p and 576p, I believe, so it's considerably cut down from those numbers, obviously. But basically here, Switch 2 quadruples resolution, which is a similar finding to what John and I found in a variety of Switch 1 software that was updated for Switch 2, right? And other Switch 2 editions as well. Basically that it's very common that on Switch 2, both in handheld play and docked play, if you still have the resolution headroom in terms of not maxing out the display hardware, you'll get a quadrupled resolution target in addition to oftentimes more stable frame rates, or at least very comparable frame rates. Here you're basically getting quadrupled resolution and 60 FPS, or something closer to like a doubled resolution and 120 FPS, which I think is quite good. And here, of course, in this case, you're also getting much higher grade textures, which I did definitely notice on Switch too. The fact that you get up close to that 2D art and it holds up miraculously well. I'm sure they really put a lot more storage into those assets, which is quite impressive. So yeah, I was just very pleased by the quality of this port in general. Like it is a game that clearly has a Switch 1 lineage, but it's also still one of the best looking Switch 2 games on the platform at the moment. I think it's really impressive.
Yeah. I've got a couple of final points to add. Firstly, performance. It's basically a non-issue. It's 60 frames per second, as you would expect from Retro Studios, especially if there's been a resolution cut instigated. I mean, it's just pretty solid. We did try the desert where John found some very minor, and I'm talking like almost imperceptible frame rate drops on Switch 2. I found a frame rate drop there, but otherwise pretty solid.
I found a couple more, very similar. From a bit later in the game, but yeah, it's non-issue. It's
it is a non-issue.
A single frame here or there. It's almost imperceptible.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest issue I had with the Switch 1, and it's nothing to do with the software, it's to do with the fact that I had the Pro Controller to play it on Switch 2, and I had to use the Joy-Cons for Switch 1. Ooh. I just couldn't get on with them at all for this game, for first-person shooter. The second point I wanted to make was just generally, and we're going to move on now to more general discussion about the game. My point on this is pretty much on if anybody else makes a first-person shooter, you instantly know what you're kind of going to get. They all feel very much the same. You know, it's kind of like almost like a common language for first-person shooters on PC and multi-platform consoles. But this is different. It just feels different. It's compelling. It's in the fact that it's not instantly familiar, probably is to people who've played a lot of Metroid games in the past, but it stands alone. It's very different from the kind of first-person shooter you play elsewhere. The Nintendo difference, it's something tangible. I think it's quite superb. Secondly, I think the quality of the visuals on Switch 2. I mean, yes, you can see the Switch 1 origins there. Obviously, the game would have been developed mostly with Switch 1 in mind across its lengthy development period. But the changes they've made to, get the most out of the Switch 2 architecture, I think they pay off. I mean, certainly in terms of image quality and in terms of just like, tech art, the quality, the craft here is just superb. Certainly a few shades of, I think, Halo 4 on Xbox 360, but obviously this is running at twice the frame rate on Switch 1, which is pretty awesome.